It took me a while to move from someone who served the Secretary of Commerce to a position where I was asking or even at times directing people senior than me, had way more money than I did, had much bigger responsibilities, and to do specific things so that we could be successful. And I've learned now, many years later, success is driven by a little bit of vulnerability about where we are at the current moment, having the ability to be super transparent, and then not be afraid to ask people for stuff and to direct them to do things on behalf of the organization. And I kind of shed that, and I think we've been successful ever since.
That's the voice of Matt Priest, President and CEO of the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. In this episode, Matt reflects on his transition from public service to leading FDRA during the 2008-2009 recession and highlights the importance for leaders to seek help, build a strong team, and foster innovation. He also shares how his faith guides his leadership style, promoting respect, vulnerability, and service while balancing personal priorities. My name is Buddy Teaster, President and CEO of Souls for Souls, and you're listening to the Repurpose podcast, featuring candid conversations with business leaders who share the ups and downs, the wins and challenges they faced along the way, and how they learned to overcome them. These are the real stories of going from tailspin to tailwind. I want to welcome Matt Priest, who is our inaugural guest on the Repurpose podcast. So I'm grateful for you, Matt, for doing that. Thank you. We've been friends for a long time. You've been on the Souls for Souls board. I've been on your podcast, so it's a favor that you're doing this to get us started. Before we dive in, maybe a little bit about who you are and how you got to your current position.
Yeah, buddy, thanks for the opportunity to be on the inaugural podcast. Inaugurations in my town of Washington, D.C. have a lot of pomp and circumstance to them, but they're a pain. The traffic's terrible. It's hard to attend them. This is way easier. I'm super excited that we're on this inauguration as it relates to your podcast. And as you indicated, we've been friends for a long, long time. We won't even count the years it'll show our age. How I got in this role, I've been at the FDRA for almost 16 years. And my career track has been one that can be kind of typical DC. I worked as a congressional aide on Capitol Hill. This was in the early 2000s for a member of Congress from North Carolina. I cut my teeth on trade policy during that time. There was a lot of trade agreements moving through Congress that I helped my boss navigate through those considerations and those votes. Trade votes are never easy votes. And that was noticed by the White House Office of Presidential Personnel in the Bush administration. And so because of my work on the movement of the Central America Free Trade Agreement in 2005, I was nominated by President George W. Bush to serve in his administration at the Commerce Department, focused on trade policy as it relates to textiles and apparel. Because my boss was from North Carolina, and we had a lot of experience working with the apparel industry in particular. And during that time, we did a reorg, and footwear was moved into my space, and so I managed footwear trade policy all the way up to January 20th, 2009, when President Obama was sworn into office. And so, for me, I cut my teeth on trade policy, on diplomacy, on constituent services, and on coalition building. And I had the opportunity to become just the third chief executive in, at that time, the 64-year history of the organization of the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. Again, now we just celebrated our 80th anniversary. We've never been more relevant. And as I like to tell our team, we're firing on all cylinders. And so that's been my journey to the footwear space. And from what I hear from all the old timers ahead of me, once footwear gets its teeth in you, it just does not let go. And so I fully anticipate that I will die in this role.
Well, hopefully that's a long time from now. My footwear connection is shorter than yours, but I feel the same. Like, it's hard to imagine not being in this world now. But I want to go back. So the first season of this podcast, Matt, is around tailspin to tailwind. So stories of, going through a dip, sometimes a pretty steep one. And I think when you came to the FDRA, it wasn't all unicorns and rainbows when you showed up. So can you talk a little bit about what you came into and how you figured out what was going wrong and how to get back on track?
Yeah. So when I came to the role, it was the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. And I was young, I was 31 at the time, and I had only been in kind of government positions, even though they were political in nature. It only served as a kind of a government official in that regard. For me, I'd never run a trade association. I'd never run a nonprofit. Well, not a nonprofit like Souls for Souls, which is a 501c3, nerd alert. We're talking tax code here. I'm a 501c6. I'd never done any of those things. So I came into an organization that had a chief executive that had been there 27 years, a Great Recession. Our dues were based on sales, and I had no network. I mean, my network was very small and I was green. So my first year at FDRA was really, really hard. We had a lot of really hard conversations. We were bleeding money. There was a lot of low-hanging fruit in the organization. That year was super difficult. And what I learned is a couple things. I'd come up in an era where I was serving a member of Congress. I was serving a commerce secretary, someone on the president's cabinet who'd been a CEO of a major breakfast food corporation for many years prior to his appointment. And I was just so used to being the one to do things for other people. And maybe it was my Marine Corps brat upbringing. I wasn't equipped to ask other people in senior roles than me to do stuff for me. And so that was really hard for me to kind of grasp onto. I had a board that loved the organization, that wanted to be a part of it. We were small at the time. We weren't nearly as big as we are now. We were kind of on life support, so it was a kind of a dire situation relative to our funding and our relevancy and the expectation of what we would accomplish. And I just wasn't asking for help. I think pride was involved, a desire as a young professional in the private sector for the first time to I got this, nothing to see here. We can pull this off. And I didn't have it, and there was a lot to see there actually. And so it took me a while to move from someone who served the Secretary of Commerce to a position where I was asking, or even at times directing, people senior than me, had way more money than I did, and had much bigger responsibilities, and to do specific things so that we could be successful. And I've learned now, many years later, our success is driven by a little bit of vulnerability about where we are at the current moment, having the ability to be super transparent, and then not be afraid to ask people for stuff and to direct them to do things on behalf of the organization, because that's why they're there serving on our board or as a part of our membership. And I kind of shed that, and I think we've been successful ever since.
Matt, so it's really, I didn't know you were that young when I guess I could have done the math. That's a lot in any situation, but all those things together are really tough. What was the first time when you realized, oh, I can do this? I can certainly imagine I'm not asking for help. I'm just going to put my head down and go. But the first time that you did it and the person said, okay, how did you get to that point? And was it an immediate thing? Like, oh, I got it now, or did it take a while?
What's today? No. So, I mean, for me, buddy, it was a matter of, we had a board meeting in the fall. It was December 2nd, 2009, if I'm not mistaken. We go in, we have a big budget deficit, and the prospects are dim. And just before that meeting, I had gone to see our chairman in Kansas City and kind of walked through, okay, here's where we are. And he was like, this is not a pretty picture. You need to get your act together. And he kind of read me the riot act. And I was a conscientious person, but this notion of like, you eat what you kill. Like you have to be hungry, and you have to go out and do it. And you have to be willing to ask people to do things. We went to that meeting, and it was the hardest board meeting I've ever had. It was my first one. We were running a huge deficit, and and I think a lot of people are like, who is this clown? I mean, I may have heard those murmurs and whispers. I'm being super, super vulnerable with you right now, but that was like a moment where maybe my being naive set me to kind of be almost like, I got this because I can do it. And so it's this mixture of being naive and prideful. And from that moment forward, I haven't looked back. We've been profitable. We've grown significantly. We've employed some phenomenal people along the way. And I think that was, over time, as we've matured, I guess there's stages to that question, buddy, where like, if I look back now, I'm like, I actually really didn't even have it then. But when the industry turned to us and said, hey, we've got this organization called the Fashion Footwear Association of New York that needs some TLC, you guys are the fixers. Will you take that? Here
Yeah.
you go. That was a vote of confidence from the industry. And then subsequently to that, hey, we've got this breast cancer research, footwear research firm, like arm and association. Will you run that? Those were signs to us that the industry was seeing what we were doing, valued our leadership and service to the industry, and it was a vote of confidence. So
Sure.
those types of decisions are the ones that really helped me realize that I think we were doing the right thing.
I know your team, Matt. I know how closely you guys have worked together. But talk about what you found team-wise when you came and how you changed that. I just know my experience. You can make all the right decisions and have all the right strategy, but if you have the right team, it doesn't matter that much. So how did you have to reshape that team, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, so when I came on board, there was only, including myself, 4 staff members. We're really small. We're very lean, and they were all holdovers from the prior executive. And you know, I was young. I'm a loyal guy as well, and I'm not kind of the one that would come in and just clean house to clean house. And I didn't have really people to bring in with me, so I'm not going to clean out the folks that are there. But over time, we had someone retire, and then I had to let one person go, and then someone else went on to do something that moved out of the city. This was well before virtual opportunities and working from home. And so I got to kind of build out my team from there based on attrition and people retiring. And slowly but surely started to put in pieces of the puzzle that would help us grow. I brought in a gentleman by the name of Andy Polk, who he and I had worked on Capitol Hill together. Again, very scrappy, very challenging the status quo, super creative on how we build things out and how do we serve constituents. We viewed the industry as our constituency, like we were members of Congress. We were elected by the industry to run this organization. How do we best serve the organization? Right. We also made a critical decision early on once Andy came on board, and we started to kind of think through where we sit in the marketplace. We can't just be lobbying. Lobbying is this weird thing where some people are willing to invest in it. A lot of people are not willing to invest in it. And if you attach your brand as an organization to the approval rating of the U.S. Congress, which I think peaks at 15%, you're not going to be well thought of as an organization, even if you're a nice guy and they think you're great. And so we started to think through, okay, what are all the other things we can do to serve the industry that has nothing to do with lobbying? So consultations on sourcing, data services and analysis, networking opportunities, events and education. We really poured into that. And then at the bottom of the list was like, oh, by the way, we lobby. So when President Trump is elected the first time around and everything starts hitting the fan on tariffs, we were there. We have tons of experience in this space. And everyone knew we could do it, but it wasn't the only thing we were doing. What's really critically important to me, and we have a team of 8 now, is I view it as a locker room. And I want, even when we're losing, I want people to work together in a collaborative way. And I say this in every interview, and some people on my team make fun of me for it, but I'm no turning back. When I hire someone, I want you to be able to take out the trash and give a major speech to the industry, and then everything in between. We don't have time for roles and responsibilities that are super structured. We are a flat organization. Everyone has access to me. I serve them as much as they serve me. And it's kind of this collaborative environment that allows us to do what we need to do and to focus on our membership, which is where we get our mandate from. So that's how I approach it. And there have been times we've had a candidate who our team has wanted to hire, and I kind of review the potential, and I look at the background, I look at social media. I'm like, you know what? They're not a good fit. They're going to kind of, they're going to muddy the waters for us, and that's not going to be good for us being cohesive. So anyway, long-winded answer to kind of our strategy on how we build out a great team.
Yeah, we've done a great job.
Thanks.
And the fact that you guys have been successful at all those things, the events, the research, just really terrific. Change the direction a little bit, but just as important in terms of relationships. And I think something that you and I share, you're the paid guy. In some ways, you know the most about what's going on. You've got this volunteer group that shows up to be your board. Some of them have pretty deep footwear experience, but not on the political side, maybe. How do you, this could apply to lots of situations, not just the not-for-profit world. How do you keep that balance of service, which I know is a part of who you are, but there are times when you're like, I know the right answer here. How do you navigate that, especially when your chairman might change every 2 years or so?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I'd love to unpack that more and kind of even what your motivation as you think about that would be, buddy. But okay, for us, it is a volunteer board. We've built a board that is who's who of the industry. We're a great level setter. So it's not all big multi-billion-dollar corporations. We have the family importer sourcing nothing but 100% from China. We've got the major retailer. We've got the private retailer. We've got the company that does retail and private label, and is all kind of jam into one. And we're all over the country. And so we're constantly trying to ensure that we have a really balanced board, and we provide options of execution in a sense. So, perfect example, what we're going through right now with the potential for additional tariffs with the second Trump term. We basically say, here's the threat, here's how we're navigating, here's the information we have and what we think you should do. Mm-hmm. And as a board member, here are 3 or 4 things, pick one for you to get involved. Not everyone wants to go on TV and talk about it. They might be publicly traded, they might be in a quiet period, so they don't do that, but they might fund certain initiatives. So we say, okay, here we have an emergency fund, we're doing some polling, we're doing some really creative things, help us do that. If you don't want to do that, show up on TV or talk to the press on behalf of the industry, and we have kind of a bullpen of executives who are willing to do that. And if that's not it, show up to our event in DC in April for Exec Summit, April 29th and 30th in 2025. We'll be talking about this with policymakers. Mm-hmm. So check that box. So we try to provide a menu of options, and then there's no shame. I mean, my last name may be Priest, but we do not provide shame on anybody. Pick what's best for you. You know what's best about what you're doing with your business and what's effective to you. The last thing I want to do is impede upon the profitability of our members in any form or fashion. Mm-hmm. And if we get in the way of that, then we're not doing our job. So we want to make sure that we provide options for people to choose from.
Matt, just to push on that a little bit more, specifically with your board chair, what's that relationship like? Because I'm imagining you're spending more time with him or her.
I've been so blessed by our chairman over the years. It is a 2-year term. And we have a kind of a succession plan. So we have a chairman, a vice chairman, a treasurer, and that's kind of how the chairmanship ranks are developed. So right now our chairman is Jennifer Bendall, who's a senior executive at Nike in the government and public affairs space. And I've known Jennifer for as long as I've been in this job. We have a symbiotic relationship. We're super close personally. We're friends. While at the same time we connect weekly about issues that pertain to whether it's the policy side of things or it's the operational personnel side of things as it relates to FDRA. And I know my next chairman will be Josue Solano, who runs BBC International. He's the vice chair. And so there's this continuity that's very important to us. We have a robust history of serving the industry and doing a really great job building the organization into a super relevant organization that is today, that have a ton of autonomy and a ton of trust. And so for a lot of what we try to do with our board is we try to make it plug and play. It's not too onerous to be a part of it. I think it's a little different on a C6 board than a C3 board. I think there's more requirements on a C3 board, fiduciary and otherwise. But for us, it's like, provide us some guidance on how you think what you think our priorities should be. And if you're cool with it, like, give us a little runway to do our thing. And Jennifer, Josue after her, prior to Jennifer, Cliff Sifford at Shoe Carnival, they've all done that and allowed us to kind of continue to do what we think is best with key guidance along the way. So I talk to our chairman every single week on a Friday, usually in the morning, and sometimes it's all business, and sometimes it kind of goes about what the weekend plans are, or what you're having for dinner, kind of thing. So every personality they usually take on the personality of their employer, and I think that's kind of how we navigate through the chairmanship and the president CEO role.
Great. I'm going to ask a personal question, and you can pass. The beauty of editing, if you want to. But you talked about being vulnerable and transparent, which I think is, those are hallmarks of your leadership, no question about that. So one of the things I've been really fascinated by is your willingness to talk about your faith in your work. In DC, a place where that can be a third rail, right? Sure. I admire the fact that you found a way to do that. So can you talk a little bit about your decision and how that showed up. And like, has there been pushback? Have you been at times had to defend that position around Israel or anything else, for example?
Yeah. What a really great question, buddy. I really appreciate you asking me. You know what? My faith is a part of who I am. And I've had, just like anyone else, ups and downs in life. And it's been like an anchor for me. And so God's providence and his priority in my life and his word's priority in my life has always been critical to me. And I take to the utmost importance his instruction to do unto others as I would have them do unto me. The golden rule is really important to me. And so while I have my kind of theological convictions, my conviction to love all people at all times and all circumstances, whether I agree with them or not, whether they piss me off or not, is kind of how I approach. And so the vulnerability is really a testament to the industry, right? I trust the industry to accept me. We live in an age where everyone's kind of defining who they are in their own terms, and it's quite an interesting age to navigate. And so I kind of say to myself, well, I'm a little old school at sometimes, and maybe I can just throw myself out there as long as I treat people with respect for them to, love me for who I am, right? If everyone else is asking for that same respect. And so in that regard, I'm no different than just about anyone else that's out there. And so I've just decided I'm not going to be dogmatic about it. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to proselytize in that sense, but I'm going to share with people what's on my heart. And so I have an email I send out every Monday morning called What I'm Hearing. Most of it is like business stuff and the things that are happening within the industry. But every once in a while, I find it necessary to kind of reaffirm things that are important to me because of my faith. And so whether it's anti-Semitism in the industry that we had pop up a couple of years ago, or it's the attacks on Israel on October 7th, or it's something as simple as like the Northern Lights coming down into Central Virginia, just kind of sharing my heart with people. And I found that I get a lot of great emails from people when I do that. And it's a lot of people saying, hey, and it's all political spectrums. It's not just like one people group. Like I really, thank you for sharing this. It's super encouraging to me. And it kind of encouraged me. Like I'll tell a story. I was telling one of my kids back in the day, like we were talking about the moon, right? And I'm like, the moon doesn't generate light. I was saying this to one of my kids. And they're like, really? And it's kind of, you don't really think about it. We think about the moon, but it's just a rock hanging in space that's reflecting the sun. And so I view that as my relationship to the Lord as to his people. I'm just a rock hanging up in the footwear world, reflecting his love to people. And so my hope is that comes through in how I treat people, even if I disagree with them, how we treat politicians that we disagree with. Will always be respectful of people. And so I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share more of that because it's important to me. It's really important.
Yeah, I think you do a great job of that. Souls for Souls 10 years ago now sort of made the opposite decision. I think we were trying to straddle the fence of being faith-based and not faith-based, and a logo was, and we had this really clarifying moment from one of our board members who said, the work speaks for itself. Right. So we took the other tack of saying we're not going to be explicitly faith-based, but this is a place where everybody from an atheist to a hardcore fundamentalist can show up and work together.
Yeah.
And that respect, that's the glue, right? Maybe you don't talk about politics and some other things that might fray that a little bit, but there is this place to come together. So I think there are ways to get there, but talking about it is important instead of just like, what is Matt doing? Or why did Buddy say that this is not faith-based? Those kinds of things. If you don't articulate them, people fill in the gaps the wrong way, right? And so by talking about it. So thanks for sharing that.
Of course, my pleasure.
So 2 more questions. You came onto the Souls for Souls board pretty early. You were still new at the FDRA. You'd already sent a board member our way before we got to you, and she was terrific. So because you're in the industry, you have a platform and a position. What made you come to Souls for Souls? Like, what was interesting to you about that at that point in your life and your career?
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of multifaceted. One was a desire to be a part of the industry associations or those organizations adjacent to the industry that were of value and that had a credibility. And we all know, maybe not everyone knows, but the history of Souls for Souls, there's up and down periods, and those are well documented in your book, your first book.
And the tailspin to tailwind.
That's right.
That didn't come out of nowhere.
That's true. Right. Exactly. So for me, it was one, I like what you were doing, and I felt like a camaraderie. Maybe I've never expressed this to you, but I had to come in and, to mop up some things and change some things around to build credibility again. And I felt almost obligated to you as the fresh face and the new guy with the great hair to kind of really help rebuild something that had some difficult times. I remember you and I had breakfast in Las Vegas at one of the platform shows. It was a Bellagio, some hotel, Lord knows which one. And we really were you were mapping out kind of what you wanted to do. We were talking about potential board members, and you were really starting from scratch in a lot of ways. And I had a similar kind of dynamic. So that was part of it, right? This camaraderie, knowing that you had a vision and that it would grow and I could help be a part of it. I totally agree with you. In a pluralistic society that's serving a broad customer base, if you will, I like to be in an environment where I'm challenged, where I'm not in a bubble, where people who think differently than me or have different perspectives than me come to some kind of mission together. And I think you do that beautifully within the four walls of Souls for Souls. But it was one of these things like Souls for Souls, faith-based. I even sponsored a donation place at my church. And so the point being, we didn't have a charitable arm at FDRA. This could really help us serve in that way. And I could be on a board with some really great people. And so it's just pretty as simple as that.
Well, you were on our board for 6 years and you're still involved and a supporter. So I appreciate all that and of course, the friendship and the camaraderie. So last question, in your podcast, which I'm a regular listening to, you have the what do you get? What are you getting kind of question, right? Which you ask everybody, which I love. I don't have anything that clever.
Well, we haven't done that in a while, so it's not that clever.
Well, I kind of like it. So,
okay, we'll bring it back for you.
Mine's going to be more philosophical for you. A lot of times people ask the question, what do you wish your 20-year-old self knew that you know now? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to ask you that question.
Okay, bummer.
What do you want yourself 20 years from now to remember about this moment? Like, what is great now that you want to be sure you hang on to in 20 years?
Wow. First and foremost, I want to look back and know that I served my family well. I have 3 daughters who are college age, one in high school, and I've been married for 25 years. So if I look back in the prior 20 years, I wasn't always that great husband and father. And so 20 years from now, when I'm 67, I want to look back and say, you know what, this family has been my top priority, and the means to support them has been the FDRA and in the shoe industry, my other family, right, my work family. And so that's critical to me. I want to spend the next 20 years really continuing to support my family and love them as best I can. Because I got 3 weddings coming up and all kinds of, college graduation. I mean, it's just going to be a whole thing, right? So that's part of it. From a professional perspective, I want to continue to grow and I want to continue to show our relevancy. I don't want to ever rest on our laurels. One thing we pride ourselves in, there's kind of this unspoken language of the typical trade association DC.
Sure.
It's like stodgy, it's not innovative, it's very wonky, it doesn't do anything other than talk about lobbying, and we don't want to be that. We launched our podcast 9 years ago almost. We started cutting video content on the Hill, the steps of the U.S. Capitol many years ago. We used Zoom in 2018 or early 2019 before the pandemic even hit. The point being, we want to be innovative and we want to be creative and we want people to be able to plug into us. And if I look back in 20 years from now, we've done that and we've gotten rid of some tariffs. I will high five myself over and over again. I think we call that clapping, but I will high five myself because I will think to myself, you know what? Job well done, my friend. And yes, I will be talking to myself, but I think I will be very satisfied if I'm able to accomplish those things.
Great. Well, thanks for both those perspectives, Matt. Thanks for spending the time and that you have with Souls for Souls and all the other work that you're doing. So it was a great way to start the podcast. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks for listening to the Repurpose Podcast with Buddy Teaster. You can learn more about what we do at s4s.org, And if you like this content, please share, rate, and review our episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts.